The following is an Operation Podcast production.
Hi, I'm James Kimmel Jr. I'm a lecturer in psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine and the author of the new book, The Science of Revenge. Today, I'll be teaching you about revenge addiction. Welcome to Ever Forward Radio.
So today's topic is all about revenge. And when this came across my desk, and I have to think about the listener, the viewer right now going, revenge, this isn't top of mind for me. I'm not, a serial killer. Well, maybe. And I'm not someone out there trying to just get back at people all the time. But Dr. Kimmel, your approach to revenge, I think, it got me thinking very differently about this concept that we probably only think about in worst case scenario. But I'm really excited to have you kind of pull the veil back on that and also shine a light on how you're saying this is actually a very secret, up and coming addiction. So we're here to talk about the science of revenge, understanding the world's deadliest addiction and how to overcome it. So first and foremost, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Chase. Just excited to be here.
My pleasure. This is a very new and different, fun and exciting topic, so the pleasure is all mine. But for someone tuning in right now, before we jump into the science of revenge and the addiction behind it, convince them to stick around. Give us the high level, quick explanation of who you are and why do you think someone should keep listening for the next 45 minutes or an hour?
Sure. A couple of things. I think the one thing to know is that your brain on revenge looks like your brain on drugs. That's a new discovery that science has just made. And why that's important to every listener is because every person, every human being has the desire for revenge in them when they've been wronged. All of us do. That's a built-in evolutionary adaptive behavior. So we all deal with revenge cravings, and let's just talk about what that means. So revenge is punishing the person who wronged you or their proxy in any way. It could be something as slight as an insult, right? Or a neglect, not paying attention enough to you in the way that you think you should be paid attention to, or being mistreated in some way that's light. It could be interpersonal relationships and a significant other. A lot of revenge going on there when people feel, insulted or betrayed, shamed. Shame is a big part of this. A lot of people have a lot of ways to feel shamed, and we all experience that type of feeling. It can be significant. It could be pretty minor. It could be road rage. It could be bullying at a school with maybe your kid is a victim, or you were a victim, or maybe you were a bully. It could be things like political grievances, right, that are big right now, and people expressing that on the internet. So one of the high risks of social networking platforms is that humanity wasn't prepared to be presented with
That's a polite way of putting it.
Yeah, prepared to be presented with a platform, right, in which one person's grievance can be transmitted and infect millions of people at light speed by just clicking a few taps. And the platform also gives all that millions of people the ability to pass it on, and also to instantly retaliate with a retaliatory mean tweet. So everything that you see on social networking in terms of expressing grievances, whatever your political background is, it doesn't matter because it affects 100% of the people. It's not a liberal problem. It's not a conservative problem. It's an everybody problem. And we all face it, and it's harming the country right now at that level. So we have national, and I would say, America's become or is increasingly a revenge-addicted nation in that way, and we're seeing that in all forms of government and at all levels, local, state, national. We have this going on at all areas. So I don't know. I think it's one of the most important topics, and here's probably why that we need to think about is because revenge has also been identified as the root motivation for almost every form of violence that we know. So interpersonal violence, children and youth violence and bullying, gang violence, murder, suicides, mass shootings, insurrections, terrorism, violent extremism, warfare, Soldiers, you're a former soldier. I'm a former lawyer. Those are like combat positions where we're dealing with our grievances, right? I mean, a soldier ultimately is hired sometimes to get revenge against the enemy, whatever the enemy is, on behalf of the nation.
That's the core of what we're trained to do.
That is the job, right? I mean, that's the job description. Same with me.
All the
I was
it's
hired.
called basic combat training for a reason.
There you go, right? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No.
you know, and I was hired the same way as a lawyer to get revenge on behalf of my clients in a lawful way. The soldier's trying to do it in a lawful way as well, right? I mean, the law permits soldiers to go and do this, whereas in everyday society on the street, that would never be tolerated, right? So
legal revenge,
right? And lawyers have the license. I mean, I sort of explain it as lawyers have the only license in society, really, to be able to prescribe, manufacture, and distribute revenge to people. And if it's true, and I believe it is, and we have a lot of neuroscience to back it up now, that revenge seeking, this craving that we get, can become addictive, then lawyers are selling an addictive drug, not very different from doctors selling, OxyContin as it's an opioid to provide that to patients. And potentially, as it was the case, a decade or so ago, not understanding just how powerful and addictive that is and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And maybe some of them actually knowing it and making a lot of money on it, like lawyers can do. So it's everywhere. It's built in. And we, by seeing it as a brain biological process, it empowers us to do something about it, to tamp down the violence and make our lives better.
Let's kind of start then with defining our terms. And when I was looking up revenge, just a quick Google search here, I found 3 definitions. And I would love to see if you agree what maybe your personal definition of revenge is, and if we have revenge all wrong, if it needs a rebrand, a redefinition. 1, a desire for vengeance or retribution. Mm-hmm. 2, an act or instance of retaliating in order to get even. And 3, which I think is pretty interesting, and I think here's where most people probably, if they get honest, can really relate to the aspect, the feeling of vengeance, is an opportunity for getting satisfaction.
Well, the last one really points to the neuroscience of how pleasurable revenge seeking is. That's really interesting. I would probably say, however, that with regard to all 3 of those definitions, they're somewhat incomplete, because revenge, it has aspects of all 3, but there is a necessity of having a grievance. So let's define grievance for a second and just step back one step from the revenge. You don't usually have a desire for revenge unless you have a grievance. A grievance is considered to be a real or imagined perception of having been mistreated or treated unjustly or victimized. All right, that's a grievance. And we have these grievances all throughout our lives every day, almost from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed. We can feel, hey, this wasn't fair. This person shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have said that. And we can have grievances against ourselves. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have been this way. So you can have self-revenge seeking as well as revenge against the other. But a couple of things to think about that are really important and high risk are, one is it can be a real or imagined grievance. So if the grievance is real for you, even if a panel of 1,000 or 1,000,000 people would go, that wouldn't have bothered me. Doesn't matter. If it's real for you, it's a grievance. And if it's triggering revenge desires, which can be compulsive, then you have to manage that, and the rest of us do too. It doesn't matter that it was imagined, that you just completely manufactured it. And humans do this manufacturing of grievances all the time in all sorts of ways, from entertainment and media all the way through our daily lives of misperception. We perceive somebody's silence or what they said to be targeted at us as an offensive thing. And now we're on the track of a grievance, and we may want to retaliate against them in some way. So Sigmund Freud said in a book of his that humans daily and hourly are going through life doing away with, which is to say getting rid of, kind of wanting to kill or destroy people all the time. Like we're living with this sensation of being wronged and this desire to harm the person who wronged us on a very regular basis.
Do you think that is that something conscious, or is that just kind of this very limbic system survival primitive part of our brain that is just, if this happens, this then kind of happens in our background, but we don't actually act on it all the time?
Yeah, it's a good question. He was talking, he referred to the subconscious, right? So when it's happening at that level, I think he was describing what's going on in our unconscious state, our subconscious. But in our conscious state, I'm sure, many of your listeners can think about during the day, if you had to actually just put a little tick mark for every time that you feel wronged or offended or mistreated or bothered or felt like something was fair. I mean, you just fill up pages of all of those instances.
I'm so
right?
glad you're kind of describing it this way, because again, I think when we think revenge, when I saw this word revenge for the topic today, it's kind of like, I don't know if I can really relate to this, but you're doing a really great job already of just reminding us how human we all are.
Yeah.
Every moment of every day.
Yeah.
And how something so seemingly trivial can add up to these very extreme examples where we do see, unfortunately, people go the route of extreme revenge through particularly violence or just malicious acts.
Yeah, exactly right. And, the FBI and the Secret Service, for instance, I'm talking about mass shooters now. When they've studied a lot of mass shooters, and those are almost 100% revenge acts. And when they study the backgrounds, and I do cover some I do cover some mass shooters in my book. But when they studied them, they have come to describe typically a typical mass shooter is a grievance collector, so that they are people who throughout their lives are collecting grievances. The FBI and the Secret Service haven't moved beyond the grievance stage to talk about so how does a grievance, how is it translated inside the brain into a motivation to kill, right? And there's a gap there. And that's what my book fills in, is the gap between the grievance and the desire to kill. And, but the point is that for people like mass shooters who we think are always the other, there's some extreme person, it's uncomfortable to think about, but they're a lot closer to everyone than we would imagine. Most acts of violence, most murderers are not psychopaths or sociopaths. Most of them are normal people who, under the right, or I would call wrong circumstances, had a grievance and a desire for revenge and the inability to control it at the critical moment. And I had one of those moments myself in my own life.
Yeah, your story, I mean, so many things to go into there, but just, I mean, as a pet lover, dog lover, and as someone that, especially now as a new father, I'm beginning to wrap my head around like the possibilities of what could happen to a child, or like in your experience, what a child might experience, what they might feel like they themselves can only process or can only make right, air quote here. Not to step on your toes of your story, but I mean, you do have such an incredible personal experience that was, happened to you, but then ultimately, the revenge aspect, you kind of were leaning towards taking it upon yourself.
Yeah, that too. Right. I mean, a lot of things transpired over time there. So it started with being bullied as a kid. I was raised on a farm in central Pennsylvania, and I wanted to be friends with the neighboring farm guys. We had moved there when I was 12 years old, which is it's kind of a tricky time to have to enter into a new school. And these were the guys that lived around our area who lived on really big, like dairy farms and things. Our farm, my dad was an insurance agent, so it was his farm, but it had been my great-grandfather's. My great-grandfather owned the animals that were on it. We had a small herd of Black Angus cattle and pigs and things, but we didn't make our living from the land the way all of the farm kids around me did. And I think that was a source of contempt for them. And the harder I tried to befriend them and get them to like me, the more, they resisted that. And eventually they took to bullying me, words first, then, kind of light, little shoves and things. And then it got a little worse, kicking and punch every once in a while and stuff like that. So it became a kind of a pretty miserable existence till one night, in the middle of the night, we were all asleep, and my family and I and my brother woke up to the sound of a gunshot. And, we ran to the windows. I looked outside and saw a pickup truck. It was a truck owned by one of the guys who had been bullying me. So I was about maybe 17 at this time. So a little bit older, teenagers, we all could drive. And that pickup truck took off down the road. And we looked around the house to see if there was any damage. We thought they might have been spotlighting deer, which is, illegal, but, putting a light on a deer at night and then taking
Literally
the deer.
a deer in the headlights.
A literal deer in the headlights.
It's the lazy man's approach to hunting.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So you're familiar.
Yeah, I'm from the backwoods of South Virginia.
Oh, okay. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I don't headlight deer, but I know.
But you know what
it
it means, and people will do it.
Exactly.
They're not allowed to, but they do it. Well, anyway, so that truck took off. We didn't see any damage. Went back to bed. The next morning, one of my jobs before going to school was to feed and water our various animals, the cows, the pigs. And we also had this sweet little beagle who was our hunting dog. And I went out to her pen to feed and water her and found her with a bullet hole in her head, laying in a pool of blood. It was just a terrible sight to have to see. And it was terrible, for me, not only losing her, but also kind of feeling partly responsible for it because, they were targeting me.
Like this wouldn't have happened if it weren't for me and my experience with them.
That's exactly right.
God, what a slippery slope.
Yeah, terrible. So, my parents called the police. This was early 1980s, rural farm country. The state police cover thousands of miles. And they're like, that's terrible that happened, but there's really not much we can or are willing to do about that. If it gets worse, contact us. At least now that report is in the record. So they left, and a couple of weeks passed. I'm home alone at night with my parents are out, and I hear a vehicle come to a stop in front of our house. It's like a one-lane country road where our farmhouse was. And I'm getting up to see what's going on, and there's this flash and explosion. And I look out the window, and that same pickup truck is roaring out of the smoke, and our mangled mailboxes soaring into the cornfield. So they blew up our mailbox. And unfortunately, with that was the end of my self-control for all of this stuff. So
what did you do?
So we were hunters. I'd been shooting a gun since I was about 8 years old. So my dad had a loaded revolver in his nightstand. I ran up, I grabbed it, ran out of the house, jumped in my mother's car, chased these guys down through the night. Just while I'm driving at, like 100 miles an hour on a road that was capable of maybe 30, I'm just shouting and screaming at this entire situation in full-blown rage. I chased them onto one of their farms. I cornered them by a barn with my brights on. So I'm behind their pickup truck. There's like 3 or 4 heads in the window. They slowly, get out, and they're like squinting through my high beams, trying to figure out who just chased them down this country road. And they're just like looking. And what was clear to me at that moment was they were unarmed, and they didn't know that I had a gun. And it would just be so easy at that point to just balance the scales, right? So I started to open the door. I grabbed the gun, unlocked the door, started to step out of the car. And somewhere in that little process of moving out of the car, I had this kind of insight or inspiration that it kind of into my future. And I had this feeling that, if I killed them, I would be killing some or all of me, right? At a minimum, the guy that drove onto their farm that night would not be the same guy who left. I would have to know myself as a murderer.
You were already becoming aware of these consequences or just changes in identity and life. I mean, all this was kind of going through your mind at the same time?
It was, I guess I'm explaining it. What I was aware of, some of that's after the fact explanation. What I was aware of is that I would be killed or my identity would be killed. I knew that. And that was it. And that was just that realization, which I can explain, in a more mature, calmer state now as this understanding. I think I understood implicitly that I would be a different person, even if I survived it.
There's no coming back.
And there's no coming back from taking a life,
No.
right? And I knew one thing I did, and I remember, I think, knowing was, I'm not that person. I'm not a killer. I knew I wasn't. I knew I'd been raised better than that. I knew that I didn't want to kill them. I just felt compelled to do it.
It's almost like animalistic automatic response.
Kind of animalistic, kind of like it's what needs to happen. There's a masculinity piece to this. There's the shame of having been bullied and not ever bringing it to an end. There's the shame of if I leave, right? I don't want to do this, but you've crossed all the lines. You've pushed me. You deserve what you're going to get, right? There's this struggle going on inside of my head at that moment, but it didn't last long. It lasted long enough for me to go, no, I am not going to do this. And that was just enough to, cause me to put the gun back down on the passenger seat, pull the driver door closed, and drive home.
Did you exchange words with him at all?
I didn't say a word. But
they knew what was going on.
They didn't know.
Did they see the weapon?
They never saw the weapon.
Wow.
I didn't pull it up. I didn't point it. I just picked it up and started to get out of the car. And then I got back in the car and I left. And it's a weird thing because that, even though they didn't see the weapon, and I'm glad they didn't, even though they didn't see it, the bullying did kind of end, which is it's an interesting thing. It may be, it was my mother's car I was driving. They might have thought that she had chased them. Because I never got fully out of the car, so I don't know that they even knew it was me.
And they're facing high beams, so maybe they might have just seen a figure. They might not have known it was you.
They might not have known it was me.
Maybe they thought it was your dad.
They could have thought it was my dad, right? And they might have, and I know leaving, I was hoping that they would interpret it as, somebody just tracked you down. It could happen again, and other bad things could happen to you. You don't know how bad.
You're not untouchable.
Yeah. Right. You're not untouchable anymore. Right. It's like I'm turning towards you now. Before I let it go, and I'm not going to let it go anymore. Or whoever, my parents, whoever they might have thought it was.
It's kind of the nature of bullying, right? We hear, they're only bullies because no one stands up to them.
That's right.
But once you do,
yeah,
they stop.
They typically stop.
Yeah.
And they did. I mean, and this is, this is all really guessing at this point as to what was going through their mind. But it did stop, and happily so. I was glad about that. But it ended I guess I didn't say, part of my desire to want to befriend them was that I wanted to be a farmer. I was like my career path. I wanted to become a farmer.
Well, it's the prime human driver is belonging.
Yeah, and I wanted to belong, but I actually loved what farmers do. And I wanted to, their farms were really big. They had the best big tractors. We only had a junky tractor that worked half the time. And, there was a lot of stuff that I was like, this would be so cool if I could be working on their farm or, helping them out or whatever. So it was clear to me that my farmer career was over that night, right? And I would have to come up with something else to do with myself that wasn't being a farmer. So that's where that ended there.
This whole concept of vengeance, so much more still to get into, and especially when I get into this whole aspect of addiction, which I think is a whole nother nuance to it, it's almost like revenge. How can you be so surprised, especially when you're on the end of an objective wrongdoing? If you come to my home, kill my dog, if you step foot onto my property, and let's be honest, depending on which state you're in, just that alone is enough to get a bullet to the head. I'm not condoning any of that, but it's just, it kind of surprises me, really. If you're going to go that far, if you're going to push the envelope and especially lay hands on property, person, or livelihood, how can you not expect retaliation? So it's like the other side of revenge, it seems so, how could you be so stupid? How could you not think that revenge is not going to come to your door? What's going on the other side of that?
Well, one of the things that we know from research is that bullies consider themselves to be victims first.
Really?
And that goes back to this insight, and it's been demonstrated that revenge is the root cause of all forms of violence, including bullying. And what that means is that all people all perpetrators see themselves as victims first. It's out of my victimization that I am now becoming a perpetrator. So I think from their standpoint, it may be that because my dad drove into town in the morning in a suit at like 10 a.m., where their dads were getting up at like 5 a.m. to milk the cows and were covered in manure. And there was this social gap. My dad made a decent living. He had a nice car. We were not only, I mean, we were the other out group in terms of moving into their space. I mean, you just talked about, stepping on property. And even though it was our farm or my great-grandfather's farm, we were coming in and I was the visible result of it, the one they could access. But we were coming into their space, into their community, and kind of invading it. And we were not only outside, but maybe we were also an additional social class, perhaps. And so they may have, part of their thing was perhaps a sense of victimization from shame or humiliation for their own circumstance. And that is so common that it almost has to be true in my mind, because shame and those types of small, either whether micro or macro humiliations of any kind, and social disparities, economic disparities, racial disparities, all these things, they're huge because they go really to your identity, your ego, who you are. Can I be proud of me or proud of my family or not? So they may have felt victimized in a way. Not that I was doing anything intentionally, but they may have felt that. And that's what I meant about real or imagined perception of grievance, right?
Yeah, so in their minds, they were taking revenge on you.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a random, thoughtless,
Correct.
Unprovoked act. They felt provoked. They felt like you took the first shot.
And that's what the research shows. So bullies are not typically, it looks like a bully is just, looking around and picking somebody to inflict pain upon, like a sadist. And it turns out, sadism is a pretty rare trait, just getting pleasure from inflicting pain with no motivation at all. The more common experience is not sadism, but it might be envy as the opposite. And envy is a grievance, right? You're like, I'm envious of people. I just came to LA to do these podcasts, and I'm seeing amazing cars and things, and it's just so beautiful out here. And I'm from Philly, and so you can feel envious very quickly of what other people have, and that it's painful. It actually activates the pain network inside your brain because you're feeling lesser and you're feeling like victimized. Like, why can't I? Why don't I have these things that you have? So, I mean, I'm really adding a lot into what might have been their motivation, but I think the research does bear out that bullies feel themselves as victims. Yeah. Even serial killers, for the most part, like John Wayne Gacy, I quote in the book, after raping and murdering, I forget how many boys, was interviewed and said, I'm a victim. He felt like he was a victim. And, it's just doing what victims do. It's just an incredible thing. So even in instances of rape and intimate partner violence, where it looks like, oh, this is, a lot of people think this is a male dominance power type of
just a
gratification.
Total one-off thing.
Yeah. And there's a sense of victimization first that always comes, that triggers the revenge desire. And so the intimate partner violence is often from that sense of having been rejected maybe by the person that you are now fighting with, or in a rape situation. There's more revenge seeking built into a lot of the crimes we think of that are just, monsters, people who are monsters doing monstrous things. There's a lot more revenge seeking. The monster is the desire for revenge. It's not
the
an
person
evil
inherently.
Force. Right. Yeah. It's not like an evil from outside of us that's motivating us, or we're not born to be evil, whatever evil means. We may, however, be very much born to be vulnerable to our revenge cravings and the stoking of them and the gratifying of them over and over and over again. up through including multiple acts of violence. It's a much more productive way of looking at it. First, it's supported by this neuroscience that we'll talk about, but it also is empowering because then we can think about public health prevention and treatment strategies that use addiction recovery techniques and other things that I'll talk about to actually reduce violence without relying on the obviously failed criminal justice system, which, if you think about every violent crime you've ever heard of, 100% of them were the result of the failure of the criminal justice system to deter that crime, right? I mean, it didn't work. So the threat of punishment, when somebody's addicted, the threat of punishment doesn't stop their addiction. It doesn't stop them from going and taking the next hit. And it also doesn't stop them from getting revenge. If they're truly addicted, it's not enough to just try and scare them with punishment because they just blow right through the punishment.
Yeah. I want to go back to a word I heard you say that caught my attention, victim, and dare I even say victim mentality. Now, this might be a stretch, especially in some horrific circumstances such as, like incest or rape or, other heinous acts like that. But excuse me, a personal philosophy and something that we talk a lot about on the show here is taking extreme ownership, total ownership, and total responsibility for your life. And I personally believe and have found value when I do that. It is immediate perspective shift in getting me out of the victim mentality. Instead of going, this happened to me, this happened for me. It's not they did this to me, I allowed this to happen. So therefore, what can I do to hopefully deter this from ever happening again? And then it makes me focus on me and bettering my life instead of dwelling and even turning back on the past and taking potentially an unpreferred course of action that is going to not only jeopardize probably my life and livelihood, but that of someone else. So I say all of that to ask, if we want to work on revenge, if we want to really root this out, is the work getting out of the victim mentality and taking ownership of our circumstances?
It could be. Okay, so there would be two ways of approaching revenge seeking and trying to reduce it. One is to reduce, or maybe there's almost three, but the two primary ones are either reduce the grievances that trigger revenge craving, right? Or target the revenge craving. Now, the main focus of my book is to try and target the revenge craving itself, and here's why. The number of grievances in the world are essentially infinite. There is many as there are the number of people living and breathing on the planet times the number of real or imagined ways that they can feel victimized. Yes, mind-boggling.
We can't even fathom that.
Correct.
What is that?
That's right. So when I look at it that way, I go, how can we solve a problem that is infinite? Very difficult. But all of those grievances, let's call it hundreds of billions, whatever it is, big number, all those grievances, though, flow into, like a funnel, into the one revenge craving pathway in the brain. And so if we can focus, we can easily solve one problem. If we can't solve the billions, we could solve the one. And so maybe we ought to talk about that, what that's about. But
yeah, I'm immediately going, is revenge just a neurochemical problem?
It really is, actually.
Take our meds or, fine tune some nutrition or supplementation?
It could be, right? I mean, it could be because it is a brain biological experience. So the way it works is this. When you have a real or imagined grievance, which is, as I said before, is a sense of victimization, that activates inside your brain the pain network, which is the anterior insula, okay? So all these types of shame, humiliation, betrayals, insults, disrespect, all that stuff, and physical assaults too, but these psychological ones are really the biggest load. Those all are registered as physical pain inside the brain. They're in the pain network, the same pain network that's also registering other forms of aches and pains that you have. But this is a pretty serious pain. It's a psychological pain in the anterior insula. And that register. When that happens, the brain doesn't like pain. Thankfully, we none of us like pain, or generally most of us don't. And when that occurs, the brain wants to. It's out of balance. There's more pain than homeostasis or balance. Mm-hmm. So the brain wants pleasure right away to cover up and rebalance the pain. Mm. And it seeks this pleasure by activating the pleasure and reward circuitry of the brain that is activated for addiction. Huh. Okay? That is the nucleus accumbens and the dorsal striatum. These are the two pleasure and craving and habit formation areas of the brain. They activate for revenge seeking because humans have evolved. Now, why revenge seeking? I mean, we could want, if I slugged you right now in the face, you could, in a different world, go, I think I'd like some cotton candy. That would make me feel better. But cotton candy might make you feel better. But what you really want is just punch me back, like really bad. Right?
Eye for an eye, right?
Yeah, an eye for an eye. Right. It's going to be almost instantaneous. And because we're in close proximity here, you might go, this is a self-defense act. It's not really revenge. But let's say you saw me tomorrow. Okay, so that wrong the grievance I inflicted on you is a day old now.
No, I'm coming with a sucker
and
punch.
now you're going to come and sucker punch me. That's pure revenge because you're punishing me for something that happened in the past. The wrong is gone. You're not under threat anymore.
And it's premeditated.
And it's right. Sure.
Right.
Yeah, so
it's a planned conscious act instead of just this automatic, defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's no defense here. Now you've become, and see, that's what's interesting is I would have converted you from a victim into a perpetrator there, right? Mm-hmm. So I punched you, I walk away, you see me the next day, you punch me back. Your punch is a perpetration of an assault on me.
So revenge could really just be a matter of a difference of time.
In part it is, right? So self-defense is something we all need. We need to survive. And none of my research impacts the idea of self-defense. But it does illuminate that there is a very tricky line between self-defense and revenge seeking that does flow with the arrow of time. Mm-hmm. And so the question is how long after the act does it take? How much time does it take after the grievance that you've experienced for you to be retaliating rather than merely defending yourself, right?
It's a very important question.
It's a critical question, and as a lawyer, it's critical in the law. And the law allows for self-defense, as you pointed out with some of the stand your ground laws. But the law does not allow you to take revenge or justice in the form of revenge into your own hands. It would require you to call the police if you wanted me to be punished, not to punish me yourself. So if you come back at me a day later and you slug me with a sucker punch, right? You're now a perpetrator at that point and you're an avenger.
I would love to be an avenger.
Yes.
Let me ask you this, not to get too nuanced here, but I do have to kind of lean into the fact that you're not only a revenge expert, but a former litigator.
Yeah.
And so, what about you assault me, and it would be most people would say self-defense for me to immediately retaliate to defend myself. Mm-hmm. But what if you come at me with a perceived weapon? You've got a bottle or something. And I'm completely sideswiped. I'm caught off guard. And I know that I cannot defend myself with the weapon that you have at hand. So we're in a parking lot. I leave the parking lot, go up to my office, get a similar weapon or maybe even a handgun, come back and then shoot you. Mm-hmm. Are we talking the same thing? Is that revenge? Is that premeditated? Is that self-defense?
That would be revenge, and you would be arrested for your killing of me because you left the scene, which meant you were able to flee, and you did successfully flee.
Okay.
And then you re-entered the scene with the sole intention, or one of your intentions was to shoot me.
With a choice.
Yeah, and a choice, right. So that would be, it moved. And that's why I said it's tricky, right?
Yeah.
On the arrow of time between the time you're assaulted or have a grievance and the amount of time it takes to turn that into something that happened in the past is very fast, right? So the law tries to stay tight with that and keep self-defense. Otherwise, people would be shooting people left and right all over.
Now I understand so many, Terminator movies and Minority Report, we just get rid of the whole time aspect and it's not murder, it's not revenge, it's self-defense.
Everything's in the present moment, then maybe. Maybe that's a construction, but it's not how this world works.
Yeah.
Right. Because we have the arrow of time.
Fascinating.
So, yeah.
Fascinating.
It's interesting that way.
So a lot of your work now in the book is talking about how you say revenge is an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard addiction next to revenge.
Right.
Do you really think revenge is an addiction? If so, how and why?
Yeah. So let me go back with the neuroscience for a second.
Yes,
so what we've got is we have this grievance that triggers this the addiction pathway, which is to say the pleasure and reward circuitry of the brain. Now that circuitry also fires for things like sweets, chocolate, or sex, right? We like things, they're pleasurable. That's the area of the brain that registers pleasure and gives
pain
you
and
dopamine
pleasure kind of
hits.
fire in the same areas.
You get this dopamine surge from narcotics, alcohol, chocolates, sex, all these different things that are pleasurable for us, right? Gambling for gamblers, things like that. But it becomes an addiction. Not all of revenge is an addiction, only a certain type, and that is compulsive revenge seeking. In other words, the inability to resist the desire for revenge despite knowing the negative consequences. That's the general definition of any addiction. The inability to resist an urge in spite of knowing the negative consequences of doing it. And with revenge, almost all the consequences are almost always negative, okay? Which is to say, the negative consequences can be to yourself or others. With revenge, by definition, you're always harming another person. The only way to gratify, think of it this way, the only way to gratify your unmanifested revenge craving is to go and inflict pain upon another person. With all of the other addictions, you're usually doing the thing to yourself. You're injecting a drug into your own arm. With revenge, you can only gratify it by injecting a bullet into somebody else's body. So it's a very scary process. And to have that linked up into the same neural pathway as addiction and drug and alcohol use helps explain why there's so much violence in the world and why the criminal justice system that's meant to deter all of that, just by going, hey, you're going to get arrested and incarcerated or potentially executed with the death penalty. And it never stops this huge population of people. They bust right through that deterrence. It's not effective. Just like it is not a deterrent to tell drug and alcohol users that, because we used to do this, right? Society used to punish addicts and alcoholics. They would throw them in jail, like repeatedly, and go, if you keep drinking and you show up home drunk and somebody calls the cop, we're just going to throw you in jail, buddy. So stop. And they're like, okay. And then the next day, they're back drunk again, thing, right? They're back in it again.
Because the consequences don't outweigh the action in their mind.
Well, it doesn't. The consequence.
It doesn't seem that bad.
Well, I'll explain neurologically what happens. This is the third piece and the final piece of the neuroscience, is that not only does your pleasure and reward circuitry activate to generate craving to retaliate, craving for revenge to hurt somebody else, but your prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function and self-control area of your brain, that for addicts, for people who have addiction, that goes silent. It's been hijacked or inhibited for some reason. And when that's no longer present, like it almost wasn't for me the night that I was there with the farm kids, right? My prefrontal cortex at the last second saved my ass, right? I mean, it really did. It stopped me cold in my tracks from doing something that I would have regretted for the rest of my life.
And
thankfully.
would have had to pay for in some way.
And I would have paid
with your life.
all sorts of ways. Yes. Yeah. And at a minimum, knowing who I was and what I was capable of, which I don't want to know that I would do that. And then punishment, or I would have potentially been shot. Who knows what would have happened. It would have been bad. So the consequences of addiction, or the negative consequences, if you can't stop yourself despite the negative consequences, then you might be a revenge addict. I would say I was not a revenge addict that night because I did, or was able to stop myself. But I wasn't done with revenge yet. And I went on to become a lawyer so that I could get revenge legally. Because what I was really about, here's what I was really about was, I didn't want to pay the price that I would have to pay to get the revenge I wanted. And so I looked around for a way to develop, have a career in which I could get legalized
You
revenge.
could exact vengeance.
I get my
in your own
cravings
way.
gratified and more of them. And I get paid a lot of money by other people who want their cravings gratified to get revenge on their behalf and to do it legally with what I thought would be zero consequences. It turned out I had all kinds of consequences.
Like
and you
what?
were pointing to this. Well, one of the things was I did feel like I developed into a revenge addict, which is to say, not only as a lawyer did I become like hyper bullying legal kind of lawyer, which is prized. That's what you kind of want. If you're hiring
rewarded
a lawyer,
for that.
right? You're rewarded.
More
You're
clients,
rewarded with
more
more
pay,
money,
more status.
more money, more status, more wins, right? And more hits of dopamine because it's like each time you win anything. I mean, it got to the point where inside of a piece of litigation, there's all kinds of small wins that go along the way. Winning an argument with the opposing lawyer on the phone or in it through emails, which we call pissing contests, back and forth and back and forth. Anytime you could win one of those, it felt great. When you lost one, it felt terrible. But the great feeling was, as it always is with revenge and like drugs and alcohol, it's short-lived, right? It only lasts for a brief period of time, minutes, and then you feel bad. You're like, geez, I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I was so mean. I don't know why I attacked so viciously. And then you go, I'm gonna stop doing that. And then the next time the situation arises, a similar situation, you do it again. You can't stop. And that was happening for me throughout litigation, but then it bled over into my family life. So I started being kind of an avenger with my wife, with my kids, with other family members, neighbors, just all over the place. It was just kind of like, and it wasn't that I was, running around, screaming and shouting at people, but I could become pretty retaliatory and pretty threatening on the legal side for sure, because I'm like, I have the license. I can do this. I'll sue you. I don't like what you did. I'll sue you. Yeah. It's really nuts.
If you think you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right?
That's correct. Right. And I'm glad you brought up the hammer and nail because the other part of that analogy is so the negative consequences to you of revenge seeking are not only the risk of punishment, which is what I think most people think. If I could get away with it, I might as well do it. Not so. And here's why. Because when that hammer strikes the nail, right, we always think, oh, poor nail, it just got smashed by this, 2-pound steel hammer.
Out of nowhere.
Right. But here's what we forget about. That hammer, when it hit the nail, it felt the exact same opposite impact. You cannot inflict pain on another person or become the instrument of another person's pain without experiencing pain yourself in the process. You cannot avoid it. You experience the pain that you inflict. It's like there is a law of physics that says, an equal and opposite for you. If you hit a pool ball, it will essentially shoot.
For every force, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Opposite reaction. Thank you. That was it. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And we feel that. That's emotional. That's physical. It's everywhere. So it's a false belief that we get a free pass if we become somebody else's pain, that we're not going to experience the pain that we've inflicted.
It kind of makes it seem like revenge at that level, at an energetic level, it's like a quantum part of existence.
Yeah, it's part of this world, right? You can't avoid that. So that's a negative consequence. And if you continue to seek revenge and inflict those types of pain, despite knowing, because you'll start feeling it. And I felt it. I felt worse and worse over the years through my 20-year of focused litigation career. Until I became a researcher at Yale to try to study all of this. But up until that point, I was just miserable. And I was so miserable, in fact, from doing this and feeling, I tried to quit so many times. And I've talked to people who are, former addicts, and they're like, man, you just sound like all of us. And I'm like, you're right. Now, I've been lucky. I've never had a substance use disorder or addiction. But, I for sure experienced this with revenge seeking of trying to stop, trying to quit, trying to be a better guy, trying to be a more peaceful guy, trying to be a more gentle person, and just not being able to get it done. I no matter how hard I tried. And I really began to become convinced that this is an addiction. And I looked around, of course, nowhere in society did, and just as you said, Chase, I've never heard of the word addiction tagged up with the word revenge. And that's true. and that's why I've written my book, is because we now have the neuroscience to back up my instincts that are now 20 years old. And 20 years ago, I had this was the first moment when I thought, this is an addiction and you need help. But there was no help to be found. And I then had to move into this idea of, you're going to have to help yourself. You're either going to keep doing this or you're going to you're going to work your way out of it. And I developed a process that I used for myself. And now that I teach other people, I have like a free app where anybody can use it for free anywhere called the Miracle Court app and the non-justice system. And it allows people to get revenge in their mind. It's a courtroom of the mind where you get to put on trial anybody who's ever wronged you. You play all the roles. So you're the victim, prosecutor, you're the defendant,
like
you're the judge and jury.
Vengeance.
Yeah, it's a role play of vengeance. But it doesn't end with just the vengeance. You get to be the judge and jury finding guilt. You get to hand down a sentence. You get to imagine being the warden imposing the sentence. So you get to do it all inside your head, which releases these terrible revenge cravings that you're dealing with.
Which is just a testament to what we were talking about at the beginning, the power of belief.
Yeah.
If we believe we are wronged,
Yes.
it can lead us to act in vengeance. But if we can believe that we are working through and we are acting through some semblance of vengeance, that is enough to actually not act, quite literally.
That's correct.
So the power of belief can drive you to revenge or save you from it.
It could save you from it. Right. And in the last step, so what I added, what I've just described up to this point is the normal justice system, right? What we don't have in our justice system is any aftermath sort of download debriefing where you get to decide whether or not you're well again. Did litigating heal you? It never heals people is the answer. I can tell you that because I've been through it. It gives everybody that dopamine high if they win. And then they're left feeling worse, but wanting more, and they're not healed. But what I added, this last step, it's called the final judgment, is you become the judge of yourself. And when you take on that role, a few questions that you ask yourself are, for instance, is the wrong that I've been dwelling on, right? This grievance that might be minutes, days, hours, years, decades old, and still carrying around this grudge. Is that here in this courtroom right now? I mean, can anybody experience this with their senses outside of you, the victim? The answer is no. Nobody can experience it. Are your revenge desires and revenge cravings anywhere outside of your own head too? Nobody else experiences your revenge cravings. They're only inside your head. So we need the courtroom that could heal you to get inside your head and not be outside. And we also need to acknowledge that the wrongs of the past aren't here anymore. You're just carrying them around. So what we need is a way to help you set them down, leave them behind in the past, and move on. And the last step of this fifth part of the non-justice system is to imagine. I just ask people to imagine for a moment, just close your eyes and imagine forgiving the grievance. Imagine it. You don't have to forgive. Just imagine, how would you feel, I ask. And I've done this with people, serious victims, victims of serious sexual abuse. People have had family members murdered in their family and have no way to get past it. And I go, how would you feel right now if you forgave? And almost universally, because nobody wants to forgive. Forgiveness is so taboo. It's considered a weakness or something, or it's a gift to the person who wronged you. It's not. I have neuroscience that shows it's only a gift to yourself. It's superpower healing. And I go, how would you feel? Just imagine it. And they go, yeah, I would feel better. I would feel relief. I would feel like this weight off of my shoulders. That's like that phrase, weight off my shoulder, is one of the most common responses to that. And so I go, so all along you had the power to heal yourself. You had it.
Oh, man.
You have it now.
Man.
Right?
Jeez.
You have the power to heal yourself. And then I say, you're the judge of yourself now. So are you going to sentence yourself to more days, months, years of suffering, trying to get justice in the form of revenge for something that happened in the past and no longer exists? Or do you want to set yourself free of the pain of the past and move on with your life, which is the name of your podcast, Ever Forward? And you were going to ask me to summarize that. And I'm telling you, that's what I would summarize it is. Move forward from the pains of the past, ever forward. Great name for a podcast.
Great tie-in. Thank you so much. It reminds me of, I forget who said it, but the quote, I believe revenge is like sipping poison and hoping the other person gets sick.
That's exactly correct. Yes.
But I want to go back to this wonderful kind of augmented reality experience of the courtroom.
Yeah.
When we think revenge, I think it can be thought of as, being squashed or handled through justice. But I know for a lot of people, getting justice for an event, for a wrongdoing, doesn't always feel like adequate vengeance. What is the difference between revenge and justice? Are they the same? Can we ever get them to be on the same page? Of justice being served as vengeance, and yet why some people still feel the need to take revenge into their own hands.
So the way I look at revenge and justice, and I've studied this a lot as a lawyer from the justice side and as a revenge researcher from the revenge side. And what happens, and this has been happening for a long time, but it's particularly prevalent in the U.S. probably since 9/11. Let me illustrate it this way. After 9/11, when the terrorists hit the trade towers, when President Bush came out and he said, "We're going to bring the terrorists to justice," he didn't mean we're going to march for social justice for the terrorists. He did not mean we're going to do fairness and equity the way Martin Luther King or Jesus or Gandhi or anybody else that's talking about fairness and equity and seeing the self in the other.
The U.S., we're not just going to turn the other cheek.
Yeah. We're not going to turn the other cheek. What we really mean is I'm going to get revenge on behalf of this nation. But I can't say it. And politicians can't, and a lot of us are, and even you said, you were sort of like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this topic of revenge here in this book, because, I sort of want it to be safe and in a category where only these, terrible monster people are revenge seekers.
It's what bad people do.
It's the bad people. Yeah, thank you. That's a great way of putting it. It's what the bad guys do. The good guys get justice. The bad guys get revenge. That is not at all the case.
That's just kind of
it's a polite, politically correct term.
It's a nice lie we tell ourselves to justify probably what we're doing.
That's correct.
Under the guise of revenge.
Right. And going back to, you'd said like in the military, in combat, I mean, we can tell our soldiers and our soldiers can tell ourselves, you're going to get justice for this nation. Okay. And that's a message that's noble. And it empowers, especially young men. It empowers any human being.
It's patriotic.
If I'm going to do, it's patriotic.
It's patriotic.
It's also religiously sanctioned, right? I mean, the world's religions generally favor justice seeking, but they also teach us an eye for an eye at the same time, right? So they do both.
There's a conundrum.
Right.
Yeah.
But what happens is by calling what is really revenge justice, we're able to sanctify every form of torture, murder, bombing, genocide, warfare, all of it, by saying, I'm just getting justice. That must make it okay. And we live in this illusion, this lie, that enables all the countries of the world. It is enabling Russia, which only thinks it's seeking justice on Ukraine, to just slaughter over and over. And Ukraine, which is only seeking justice against Russia, to slaughter. And the Israelis and the Palestinians, and any other conflict you can imagine, including right now, some people in the United States are gunning down somebody else. And I will tell you that 100% of the people pulling the trigger feel like they're just getting justice.
Oh yeah, look at extreme bias, look at racism, look at hate crimes, look at, ethnic groups, minority groups.
That's right.
Bullying,
all of it. Everything is justice. And when you call it justice, it somehow makes it okay. It kind of causes us to divert our attention from what's really going on, which is we're just seeking revenge. We're inflicting pain upon somebody who inflicted pain on us. That's what we're doing. So that's the distinction or lack of distinction between justice and revenge as I see it and as I describe it in the book.
I think when most people think revenge, this picture of something 10x comes to mind of, or compared to the original event. A kid pushes me down in the sandbox. So instead of going and pushing them back, I'm going to
Maybe throw sand out.
I'm going to throw my shoe at them.
Oh, that,
I'm
okay.
going to throw a horseshoe at them. I'm going to, I don't know, spit in their sandwich at lunch or something. What is it so innate about revenge that there's the act or the perceived act, and then the reaction that is so personified from that? What is it about human nature? What have you found in your research to kind of explain why it can't just be you push me, I push you? It's you push me, I kill you.
Right. So evolutionary psychologists have theorized, and I think it's a pretty strong theory, that humans evolved the desire for revenge. So we have it in all of us. There's no other in this. Everybody has the desire for revenge, just like we all have, 10
replace the
fingers
word
and 10
revenge
toes.
here just to wrap your head around
Uh-huh.
it, listener. I think for retaliation.
Sure, retaliation.
Or
the
even
desire to inflict pain
defense,
upon the person who
self-defense.
hurt you.
Yeah.
Not self-defense, no,
No?
because that's the evolved fight or flight mechanism at work,
Okay,
right?
okay.
You're trying to survive.
Okay.
It's a survival skill.
In
You
some
need it to
capacity,
survive.
we were having to meet what we're being called to do.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Revenge, and that's why it's important to think about it in time as trying to harm somebody for something they did in the past. You're no longer trying to survive. You're now bringing in a new assault into the mix that wasn't there before, and your motive for doing that new assault is because of this old assault that happened sometime in the past. That's why revenge is so tricky and so it's so dangerous. And so I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. What was your?
Why you push me, I kill you. Why does it have to be so
right,
extreme?
back to the evolution.
Yeah.
So evolutionary psychologists believe that we evolved this desire for revenge when humans, started to move from living, separately, in our individual caves and things, into living in groups.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started to live in groups, we needed a way for a few things to happen. Once we're going to live in community, we need to be able to ensure that, other people aren't going to steal my wife or my food source, maybe the lion that I just killed. And we also need to live in society to be able to compel people or ensure that people are going to adhere to the community set of social norms, right? The community rules or laws.
This sense of order.
It's a sense of order.
Yeah.
So it's a teaching mechanism. Let's think about you say you have a young son, baby. He's going to grow up and he's going to start doing things that he wants to do that you don't want him to do. And you're going to not want him to do it either because you don't particularly like it. It's not consistent with your rules of the house, or because you're aware, more likely, of the societal rules, right? And you want to teach him, don't take things that don't belong to you, for instance. Or don't eat 12 ice creams because it'll make you sick. So you might use some punishment with your child to teach him not to do that, to give him some kind of a visceral reminder.
Okay.
Don't eat more ice cream than I say you can, or don't play video games for more than 1 hour. Okay, that's your rule, let's say. And so you might use punishment as a teaching tool, but you're not using it to gratify your own desire to retaliate because you feel like your son victimized you by eating that extra ice cream.
I don't know. If he
You know what I
touches
mean?
my ice cream, he might have a problem.
That's right. You might.
Dad likes his ice cream.
Okay, and I'm with you on that. I'm a huge ice cream fan, and you might feel that way. And then also you might go, well, I know that if he eats the fourth one, he's going to puke all over his
Right.
bed, and I'm going to be the one who's cleaning that up. And so I'm preventing a future rage moment in my life by maybe taking the ice cream away from him and saying, okay, no more TV for you for an hour until you've learned your lesson. But you're not doing it because you have a grievance and a desire to retaliate against your son. So that's like the revenge that's in the background, that's running our society, kind of. It's when revenge goes beyond that to gratification that it becomes more and more dangerous. And if you can't control it, it's at max. It's at addiction level, right? And I believe, and I think the evidence shows that people who commit acts of violence are generally, by and large, revenge addicted, at a minimum, at the moment that they did it. And probably when you look back, in the FBI and the Secret Service have done this for like mass shooters and have gone and studied their histories and found that, I mean, those two agencies and law enforcement everywhere now describe mass shooters as grievance collectors. So that they're people who've easily offended. They remember the wrongs. The wrongs hurt them very deeply. And unfortunately, those agencies stopped their research, the behavioral analysis units. They never went, well, how does a grievance convert into a motive to kill, right? They know that it does, but they stopped. Well, my research fills in that gap.
Amazing.
The grievance converts into motive to kill through this reward circuitry of addiction and the craving that is formed inside your brain to harm the person who wronged you, or, and this is critical and also extra scary, or their proxy. So you can get revenge against people who didn't do anything to you, and it's still revenge to you. And I'll give a classic example. It would be, you have a bad day at work, your boss mistreats you. You come home, you kick the dog, or you have a fight with your spouse, or you just punch the drywall.
You take it out on someone or something that you think
that's safe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That I got a guaranteed win here. Yeah. Basically, yeah.
Yeah, and I know that I'm not going to lose my job. Like if I retaliate against my boss, this may be my last day. I'm not going to do that. But I think I can get away with it with my spouse or my significant other, or the dog, or hitting the wall. So, one of the things that is easily misleads people in terms of like a mass shooting is, well, they had a bunch of grievances, but they didn't shoot anybody that they knew, right? They just went out on a bender, a revenge bender.
I've never thought about this.
They're getting revenge by proxy. And I talked about
it seems so random,
people in that,
that's kind of like,
it's not random.
That's a safety mechanism through revenge.
Yeah, they're doing it by proxy because it worked at that moment in time, and they were able to do it safely. So I give an example of a woman named Olga Hepnarova Olga Hepnarova in the book. And she was a young woman in Czechoslovakia who was had been bullied a lot. She was like bisexual. This was in the 70s, communist Czechoslovakia. And she ended up renting a truck and in Prague, identifying a crowd of people. They were all senior citizens, and just driving the truck right through them at 40 miles an hour. Killed 8 people, wounded like 12 or 13. God. Terrific, horrific mass killing using a vehicle instead of a firearm. But she had sent, and the reason I focus on her is she sent a letter to the 2 newspapers in Prague explaining in advance what she was going to do and why. And she explained that she had been victimized or saw herself as a victim of all of this bullying, and her parents were abusive to her. She had described a really terrible life. And so it was a really terrible thing. All the people, none of the people she killed were her own family, who she was most angry at, and her friend or classmates who had tormented her. They were just people on the street, but this was revenge by proxy, and she described it as imposing a revenge death sentence on society. And these people were part of society, and therefore they were as good as anyone to hit with her truck. When after she hit those people, she stopped her truck, waited for the police, confessed to the crime, went to trial, had a lawyer. Her lawyer said, "Don't tell anybody why you did this," because she was freely admitting to everybody, "I did it to punish society, and I don't want people to think that I am crazy or messed up in the head." And so she ignored the lawyer's advice, testified to all that. Psychologists and psychiatrists evaluated her, found that sure enough, she was completely of sound mind. This was just her vengeance decision.
Wow.
And she said, "And I understand revenge is an eye for an eye. I got it, and so you should execute me." And they did. She's the last woman who was hung and executed. She was executed by hanging, and the last woman who was executed in communist Czechoslovakia in the 1970s.
Jeez, It's a rattling story.
It really is. It is, and there are so many. I mean, I have a chapter on mass shooters in here. I have a chapter on Hitler, Mao, and Stalin, who I go back through their childhoods and then up through the present, and you can see revenge addiction in all three of them everywhere. Hitler was 40 million killed, responsible for 40 million deaths. Mao, the same number, 40 million. Stalin, 20 million. I go throughout human history, all the way back as early as Cain and Abel, and even the very first murder in the fossil record, which is believed to be like 430,000 years ago. And there, up to the present, all the atrocities that humans have committed, and almost every one of them are the result of compulsive revenge seeking. Somebody felt a grievance, retaliated, the other side retaliates, back and forth, back and forth.
Wow.
We just do it in every war. I mean, it's all about revenge, isn't it? I mean, you were a soldier,
Yeah, it's it can be very rattling.
Yeah.
But to kind of shift gears a little bit
Sure.
and getting towards the end of our conversation here today, I want to try to keep things. I want to go a little bit lighter here,
Sure.
but also just when thinking about revenge and preparing for our conversation, I was just kind of like word playing. When I said revenge or thought revenge, I just went with like the next couple of things that came to mind. I was trying to think, what are some common ways maybe that people can relate to revenge in their life or even in pop culture? And bear with me here, but I thought of first revenge body. The concept of you have a breakup and you pour yourself into, I'm going to get fit, I'm going to get lean, I'm going to get strong, I'm going to be the healthiest, best, sexiest version. So like the argument can be made, it does literally your body good. It's good for you, but it's through the lens of revenge so that someone else feels bad, so that someone else is made worse because of what you're doing. What is your take on that? Channeling revenge to get healthier / fitter. Can revenge be a good motivator?
It can be. And I would say that would be okay as long as you don't become, let's say, an exercise addict, right?
Orthorexia.
People can really hurt yourself,
Yeah,
right?
it's the obsessive compulsive
or the
of
obsessive
getting too healthy.
compulsive with anorexia or something like that, where your revenge becomes your illness, right? So that would not be good. Using that revenge craving as a motivator to better yourself, that's a common term. The best form of revenge is success, right? I'm going to succeed despite your failure. And I know that was the case for me when I switched from wanting to become a farmer to wanting to buckle down academically. And I used all of these feelings that I had to drive myself to, work harder in college and things like that. Those are healthy utilizations of this desire with very few, if any, negative consequences, right? So not a revenge addiction at that point, and therefore it's fine.
So we're not in the addiction category, but we are still in the world of acting out of or because of revenge.
And that's okay. Like I said, we all have that, right?
Okay,
that is an adaptive strategy, as I said. Remember back to the caveman.
I see, yeah.
So revenge is a normal feeling that we all have. The question is do we act on it? How do we act on it? And if we do we do it in a way that has negative consequences to ourselves or others? That's
crucial.
Focus.
Yeah. One other term came to mind, and that was revenge sex. Revenge is the driving emotion behind usually casual sex here, for anybody not familiar with the term, to get back at usually an ex.
Sure, right.
I had a partner do me wrong, they cheated on me, or they broke up with me out of the blue. And so now in my mind, I feel like I'm getting back at them by me potentially putting my body, my health, my safety at risk by just having careless, casual sex
and your
all the time.
emotions and your identity,
Yes,
right? I mean, there's a lot of negative. So that's how I'll answer that is the negative consequences of revenge sex would suggest that you're not in control of your revenge desires because you are going after this behavior, this retaliatory sexual behavior, despite the fact that you may get either emotionally wrecked by doing it, or you may get physical diseases. You may skip a lifetime partner because you're out doing this. There's a lot of negative consequences that you may be experiencing. So if there are negative consequences attached to revenge seeking,
I see.
That's something that you need to take seriously and go, am I in control then? If I can say, okay, I'll quit revenge sex, and you do, you don't have an addiction. But if you go, I'd like to quit, but I can't. Then the question would become, and this would be for a true professional, like, well, are you a sex addict now, which is something you might have brought upon yourself by doing this revenge sex,
Very
and
true.
now
Very
you're
true.
just getting
Yeah.
interested in the high
Yeah.
of the sexual gratification, has nothing to do with the
Mm-hmm.
revenge anymore, or are you a revenge addict? And it would depend on a case.
Interesting.
By case. Yeah.
Okay. And so now kind of to bring it home for this aspect of the addiction
Mm-hmm.
in ways that I think we might be able to relate to more. If I notoriously have to get back that person that cut me off in traffic,
Yeah.
am I addicted to revenge?
You could be. Question is are you controlling it, or are you actually running them down, trying to run them off the road, putting yourself in harm's way, putting other people in harm's way? If you're doing that, you have negative consequences. If, on the other hand, you get somebody who cuts you off and you're like, and I will confess to this because I'm a definite, I will shout and scream at drivers all the time, but I do it inside. I would never confront them.
Right.
And I
yeah,
never
yeah,
do.
Yeah.
But I am furious, and I think it's unfair and unjust, and how dare you cut into my space, and you should know how to drive better, and all this crap, and all of that. But I am not retaliating, right? I'm just venting. And so that's not the same thing, and it's not a problem as long as you keep it that way and you're not driving recklessly yourself. But once you move into that, or God forbid you grab a gun and fire, you're a revenge addict at that point because you can't control it and you knew the negative consequences of doing that.
Okay.
Right?
Also, when thinking about revenge, I couldn't help but really think about all the amazing storylines of revenge. Particularly, I'm a big movie guy. I love movies. Sure. I see revenge plots, revenge themes in so many movies. I wrote down some that came top of mind, like Kill Bill,
Yes.
Carrie, even more lighthearted, The Princess Bride.
Oh, Princess Bride, big one. John Wick.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The Lion
They killed his
King.
dog.
You wouldn't think that The Lion King, I would recommend don't show that to your kid. It is one of the most powerful revenge films I've ever seen because it's all about, a constant revenge cycle with Scar and Simba.
The perceived wrong.
Mufasa. And they're doing this, though. It's a movie for kids. I remember the first time I saw it with my kids, and I went, oh my God, I wish I'd have known that this was like this. I would have never shown it to them because they're getting this huge dose of grievance. I mean, watching somebody's parent be killed there's almost nothing more traumatizing, right? So kids are watching Simba's father be murdered by his own brother, okay, nearly the beginning of the movie. And so we're traumatized. We in the audience are instantly traumatized by this. And then the rest of the movie is how are we going to get back at Scar? And how do we get back at Scar?
Oh, that's so
at the
true.
end, and look how we get back at Scar. By the end, Simba knocks him off a cliff, down into the fire and into the hyenas, so that we get to watch. Now the filmmakers pull away, but we see the hyenas and the flames coming at Scar for our revenge addiction pleasure. I mean, it is hugely dangerous.
Disney, you are twisted, man. You are messed up.
That's right.
But
right. And the Disney's has, they have all the
so
Marvel
many,
and all that
so
stuff.
many, yeah.
All the superhero movies are revenge plots, right? It's the good guys, but the good guys are Avengers, the Avengers, right?
Again, there's the justice aspect. Yeah.
Right.
We just
Justice
changed
in
the
form of
definition.
revenge.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So why then, to kind of summarize there, what do you think is so compelling and what is so, why is it such a strong point of connection for the audience for storytelling to include revenge?
Because I asked a former chairman of Disney Studios that question for the book. And he said, because it works. It always works. The plot of, victimize, because I said, are you aware, are people in entertainment aware that when you victimize an innocent character on screen or in a book or in a video game, that's traumatizing, that the audience just watching that feels the exact same pain that they do.
Immediate
if you have any empathy.
sympathy, empathy.
Right.
Yeah,
it activates the same pain network that I was telling you about. And then I said, and then are you aware that drives a craving for revenge, and the payoff for the audience is the gratification for that craving? And he said, there's an awareness. Now, he's really one of the good guys, and he was after The Lion King when he took over. And he was before all of the big superhero movies. But he acknowledged that is a huge part of entertainment, and of course it is, and video games. It's not that violent video games are the evil. It's it's revenge-seeking video games that are the danger for kids. So the studios use these plots because, man, they're just selling dopamine hits, and we're all willing to pay as much as we can, as often as we can to get them. I mean, we're hooked. And the studios, they don't think of it as an addiction because they haven't read this book yet. But I'm saying it is very much so. And we love these movies because we get victimized at the beginning, and then we get our revenge cravings stoked, and then the filmmakers gratify those at the end. And it feels so very good at the end of that movie every time that the bad guy got his. And often, the worse it was, the better it feels.
Yeah.
You know, it's just there. I mean, it's real. And I'm glad you brought up entertainment because it's a big part of it.
But it's got the Hollywood flair and lights, and and then you don't really see, oh wow, Lion King, revenge. No, it's like
you don't think about that.
Movie.
But why was it so popular? And here's I compare the Lion King to Bambi. Okay, and the reason is I apparently I've read that in Disney Studios, when they were starting to develop the Lion King and sell it to Disney and get Disney support, that they pitched it as Bambi in Africa. So that's a great comparison, and it's a perfect comparison because in Bambi, if you remember, you've seen that, right? So a parent is killed in Bambi, it's the mother, not the father.
Like the opening scene.
Yeah, the opening scene by a hunter named Man. But the difference, that's a huge similarity. And at the end, it's similar because at the end, both Bambi and Simba survive. They grow up to become kings of their domains, and they have children of their own. The circle of life continues.
They transcend their horrible circumstances.
But did they, right? So in The Lion King, there was revenge, and Simba was a successful avenger. In Bambi, there was no revenge, none at all. It was a story, a much more beautiful, less toxic to kids story about how to overcome even the worst traumatic experience you can imagine, the death of your own mother, and go on to live a good life and prevail. And it made, it was Disney's most successful film at the time. Some estimates put it into modern dollars are like $9 billion is what that. Bambi, right.
Wow.
But The Lion King was already, the last time I checked, and I quoted in the book, is like over 11 billion. So why did Disney go with a revenge plot when they had such a successful non-revenge similar plot? It brought in a lot more money. Probably a lot more adults are interested in The Lion King versus Bambi. Bambi's kind of like,
And that's kind of the thing with Disney movies right now. You really got to sell the parents first.
You got to sell the parents
to get them to bring the kids in.
That's correct.
Yeah.
If you can sell the parents and you're selling them on that drug, but the parents don't really realize they are giving their kids, first of all, you're traumatizing your kid, and then you're giving them this huge dose of revenge-fueled dopamine.
Man.
And how does a little kid manage that? And we don't even talk about it after the movie. Like, we just go out and go,
all right, well, Baby Dean, if you ever come back, and watch your dad's old podcast, this is why we don't watch The Lion King. Your mom's going to hate me because that's one of her favorite movies. But
it's everybody's favorite. And I know it's controversial for me to even talk this way because it's almost like it's a religion is the Lion King.
You can't talk against Lion King.
Don't touch the Lion King and don't touch Disney. It's like, but we kind of need to speak the truth once in a while. The last thing one of the things we didn't cover, if we're down to the end there, but just the last part is, so what do we do about all this? There's a couple of things. I just wanted to get that in really quick. One thing is, because it's an addiction and it works the same way as an addiction, revenge seeking, we can use addiction strategies to overcome it. So all the things that you might know of for other forms of addiction can work for revenge cravings and revenge addiction.
Do we need revenge rehab?
Cognitive, we should have.
Can I check into a place in Malibu for revenge rehab?
We can't, but someday I'm hopeful, actually, because, and imagine what that could potentially do. But things like cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, counseling, potentially rehabs or 12-step programs at some point when those are created, self-help programs, those all work or could work, okay? And even eventually pharmaceuticals like nalmefene and even GLP-1 drugs like Mounjaro or
Ozempic and
Ozempic.
semaglutide.
And because they've been shown to cut down on cravings, not just for
Cravings.
food.
Oh my God.
Right, not just for food, but they're studying it now for substance addiction. And so far, the early studies are very promising that it also stops alcoholism and maybe drug addiction. I mean,
Craving in
incredible
general,
drug.
not
Craving.
just for
Right.
hunger. Oh
That's-
my God.
Now, it's never been studied. This is just me speculating, but I think there's promise there, and it ought to at least be studied. We ought to find out whether it works or not, but it could, yes.
All right, you're blowing my mind.
Yeah.
Please look into that
So
more.
think about that. I wonder if if everybody gets
Wow.
on those drugs, I wonder if we'll have a more peaceful society
Yeah.
because we don't have as much revenge craving now. I don't know.
Let
It's
us know.
interesting to think
Anybody
about.
listening, watching, if you're on a GLP-1 inhibitor like, Ozempic, semaglutide, are you suddenly inexplicably not having any more road rage?
Yeah.
Do you let things, roll off your back more so than before? That's really,
Good questions.
really interesting.
I mean, those are really great questions. to
Well,
ask
think
your
about it.
audience.
I mean, wow, this could be a whole nother podcast. And I have some more coming out actually about Ozempic and stuff. But when we think about it, cravings, for a lot of different reasons, physiological, emotional, they're driven by urges and they get us to do really out of character things.
Yeah.
They have us sneaking away and eating food in secrecy or not letting people aware of what we're doing or what we're eating and hiding behaviors in a certain way.
You just described revenge seekers. I mean,
yeah.
usually that's hidden, right? I mean, we don't usually want to proudly go out and telegraph that we're going to get revenge against somebody, right? We do it in secret a lot of the time. The small ones. I mean, I'm not talking about a mass shooter who's it's a public event, but we do those things with revenge. All that stuff is happening.
It's again, not to play light on anybody's physical or mental health condition, and we definitely need medications for a lot of different things, but I am just blown away time and time again at the off-label use for medications.
Yeah.
We create Ozempic, GLP-1s, they were made for diabetics.
Right?
90% majority of people taking these now are not diabetics
Right.
or
They're
pre-diabetics.
trying to lose weight.
Yeah.
Right?
Or even I go back to, I've talked a lot about, ketamine therapy on the show. I've gone through it myself.
Oh.
Ketamine, if you've been under anesthesia for surgery, you've been on ketamine, but the off-label use now is for mental health.
Yes.
For depression, anxiety, PTSD. Man, this is incredible.
It is. So it's possible, and it's just possible that it could be, in an off-label controlled situation with a doctor, we might find good benefit among people who are, and you would probably want to start with like the most serious revenge, maybe people who have committed a lot of violent crimes in their lives and they want to stop. Or something like that. I don't know, but there are a lot of
someone
ways
that keeps going to traffic court for road rage or
right. Yeah,
speeding
it doesn't
or
have to
something
be
like that.
it doesn't have to be violent. I mean, those are the worst. And I always focus on the worst mainly because I want to get violent stuff.
We want to
right?
get that out of society as fast as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
But most revenge seeking is nonviolent. It's saying something or just ostracizing somebody. Withdrawing your love and support from somebody in retaliation for something they've done is revenge, right?
Absolutely.
You're trying to inflict some pain upon someone who you believe inflicted pain on you first. That's the thing. And my the last thing I want your listeners to know is the most potent, fastest acting, cheapest, available everywhere without a prescription way of managing persistent revenge desires and kind of getting over your traumas and other pains is actually forgiveness. This is going to sound like you got to be kidding me, but here's the neuroscience of forgiveness. It's just recently been discovered over the last 10 or so years. What happens with forgiveness is that it reverses all of those three brain areas that I was telling you about with grievance-triggered revenge desires. So the pain, what forgiveness does, when you forgive somebody, it only benefits you, not the person who wronged you, even though you think you don't ever have to tell that person that you've forgiven them. Just do it for you.
Yeah.
Do it quiet. Don't tell anybody you're forgiving. You don't have to do that. But when you do that, when you just imagine forgiving somebody, it shuts down the pain network. So the pain actually, instead of just being covered up with dopamine with a revenge hit, it takes it away. That's number one. Number two is it shuts down the pleasure and craving reward circuitry of addiction, that area that I was telling you about. The revenge cravings go away. And then third, it reactivates that prefrontal cortex, the control center in your mind, so that you make good decisions.
Gets us back in the driver's seat of our own
you're
life.
back in the driver's seat.
Wow,
exactly.
outstanding.
So forgiveness is like this superpower wonder drug that most people don't even know about. And it's just now the neuroscience is supporting like the ancient forgiveness teachings of, people like Jesus and the Buddha and in other area of philosophy that supports
one of my favorite Stoic quotes, Marcus
that.
Aurelius, the best way to get back at them, or interpretation is different. The best revenge is to not be like that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's kind of like that. So what it does show is that revenge, it's not a weakness. It's the most powerful, least expensive way of self-healing that I've ever experienced. And it works kind of immediately. And here's how your readers can experience, or your listeners can experience it. Think of a grievance that you have, close your eyes, and then just imagine forgiving it for a moment. And that's all you need to do, is imagine how you would feel if you forgave. Don't forgive, just imagine what it might feel like. You'll probably experience almost immediately a sense of relief. Do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. And you've just healed yourself. Yeah. That's all you need to do. It is amazingly powerful stuff.
Well, that and get the book. Right?
Well, that goes without saying. Yeah, you got to get the book. Right?
Well, Dr. Kimmel, this has been truly fascinating. I can't wait to follow along in your journey and see where this research takes you next, especially in the world of GLP-1 inhibitors and just what is going on in terms of the biochemistry aspect of revenge, to help us better understand how we function, why we function, and where we can get back in control of our life, to control the controllables, to help us move forward, to live a life ever forward. I say this is what it's all about. Yeah. And so you kind of already gave us, your definition or explanation there, but to ask you directly to land this plane here, ever forward, those two words, what do they mean to you? How do you live a life ever forward?
I live a life of ever forward, and this is just as honest as I can be, by practicing that forgiveness. I mean, as often as I can, every morning, every evening, every time that I feel myself losing control, is practicing that type of quick, I'm going to forgive this. And it is so miraculous. It's like a miraculous thing that propels me forward and away from harm, out of harm's way. That's one piece of moving ever forward.
Absolutely.
Getting away from harm.
I always tell my guests there's never a right or a wrong answer. I always appreciate your interpretation. Thank you for kind of channeling your work and your expertise and your life experience through the lens here on the show of Ever Forward. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chase, for having me. Just a real pleasure.
Such an intriguing, different conversation. Thank you. Your work, your book, all of it will be linked down in the video description box for you guys and in the show notes. Definitely check it out and go support my man, Dr. Kimmel here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Thanks, sir. Yeah.